Have you ever banned anything due to balancing, and if not, how do I get good? For example, Twilight Cleric / Sentinel Feat. So firstly, I have never banned anything due to balancing, because in D&D 5th edition, as a dungeon master, you always have a way to work around a particular strategy. Or really, what I like to do, just overload the strategy. Now, you give the examples of things like the Twilight Cleric and the Sentinel Feat, but I don't actually think these are overpowered in any way. They're both very good, but I would never consider banning them due to balancing. Honestly, for clerics, I'm much more concerned about things like an Order Cleric or a Peace Cleric than a Twilight Cleric. I mean, just look at what a Twilight Cleric gets. You're able to have Dark Vision and give it to allies, you're able to give one ally advantage on initiative rolls, and you're gaining access to your Channel Divinity Twilight Sanctuary, which is either going to grant temporary hit points equal to your cleric level plus 1d6, or ending a charmed or frightened effect on an allied creature. Honestly, Eyes of the Night is fine, just a great utility ability, and sharing Dark Vision usually isn't that big a deal. And then you can look at giving advantage on one initiative roll, and that's very good, but just because a creature has advantage doesn't mean it's a broken ability by any means, just means that it's a well-balanced, very good, useful ability. Now, usually when people are looking at a Twilight Cleric, they're looking at Twilight Sanctuary as the broken ability. However, if I'm a Dungeon Master running for a Twilight Cleric, I'm just assuming all the other PCs have an extra 10 hit points every time we go into combat. This is because Twilight Sanctuary is on average going to be giving you and your party on average 5 temporary hit points per round, at least at level 2, so I'm just going to take that into account while I'm planning. I'm just slightly altering my math. The same thing is true if I'm running for other quote-unquote broken subclasses like an Echo Knight Fighter or a Circle of the Moon Druid. I'm simply identifying what a character can do and stretching them to their limits. Like, for instance, AoE damage almost completely shuts down an Echo Knight Fighter. The Echoes only have 1 hit point, so any amount of AoE damage is going to destroy that Echo. Enemies with on-hit damage effects or damaging auras are going to prove a real problem to that Echo Knight. This doesn't mean I have to deploy these strategies in every combat, but if I'm trying to challenge a party, I can absolutely throw those things out there. Or sometimes at higher levels, you just need to fight fire with fire. I recently ran a combat encounter that pushed my 6-person 19th level party to their very limits. This is because the enemies I used weren't just big sacks of hit points that did a lot of damage. The combat was more intricate than that. There were a few requirements to killing the creatures that I used, and the party knew all of this ahead of time, but that still didn't make the encounter any easier. The creatures had to be beheaded to be quote-unquote killed, and the final attack had to include radiant damage. Now, about half the party had access to radiant damage, and the other half of the party were great damage dealers, but they occupied a very interesting role in that combat where they could never get the final hit in on an enemy. However, even when one of these enemies were killed, they knew that within 1 hour they would respawn, they would regenerate into another copy of themselves if even 1 ounce of their flesh remained. This was a bit of a hint because the other enemies could take one of their fallen comrades and revive them at 1 hit point if any part of their body remained. So then the party had to worry about not only killing the enemies, but making sure they stayed dead. And again, this was a party full of 19th level characters that included an Echo Knight Fighter, a barbarian that was literally resistant to every type of damage, characters with the Lucky Feat, Sentinel, you name it, they had it. The point is though that you can challenge literally any character in any party, because everything has a weakness. Now, is this an excuse for bad game design? I don't think so. New Dungeon Masters don't have more than a decade of experience to fall back on. So ideally, Wizards of the Coast should not be printing things like an Echo Knight that are arguably too strong for what they are. Or they should probably be releasing supplementary material that says, this is how you challenge this particular subclass. I think that would solve a lot of problems in the D&D community because there are so many subclasses, feats, spells that newer DMs and sometimes veteran DMs say are overpowered or broken or they ban them from their games. And I'm just sitting here like, well, you are essentially doing the DM equivalent of being a lemming and jumping over a cliff to your death. Like if you constantly send hordes of smaller enemies against your D&D party that has a wizard that loves to cast Fireball, yeah, the Fireball spell is going to feel overpowered in comparison. You have to throw in some tactics and strategy into those combats. Like, how do you counter Fireball? Well, you get those small enemies mixed in with the rest of the party, so the wizard doesn't have a clean shot to cast their Fireball and hit 5 enemies without also hitting their party. The goblins don't all run out the same door, maybe they drop from secret panels on the ceiling and are now intermixed at the start of combat. Little tips and tricks like that are what really help with balancing. So I guess, how do you get good? You should look at what a subclass can and cannot do, and what a player character can and cannot do. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How are they doing what they're doing? Maybe your paladin deals 1000 damage a turn every single turn in combat, but if they're only doing that through melee damage, that's easily counterable. Difficult terrain, fast-moving enemies, and boss monsters with retreating reactions can all counter such a strategy. No character is unbeatable, and I think there's only a select few subclasses out there where the Dungeon Master really can't do anything against that particular subclass. Or really, they can't stop the primary thing that subclass is trying to accomplish. Like if you're going up against a College of Eloquence bard, good luck, you're screwed. Or something like an Order Domain cleric. That thing is nasty, and I think a clear example of how when some players look at the game, they look at the Peace Domain cleric and the Twilight Domain cleric as the #1 cleric subclasses. The Order Domain cleric puts far more fear into my heart as a dungeon master than something like the Twilight Domain. Don't get me wrong, the Peace Domain is very good, but if you've never seen an Order Domain in action, you're really missing out. So hopefully I kinda answered your question, and as this channel goes on, I'm gonna be giving more tips on how to get around quote-unquote overpowered characters and feats and things like that. I specifically have one video that touches on if your player characters are doing too much damage, but I should really make a masterclass video about dealing with overpowered characters. Now, speaking of overpowered characters, we have a few questions dealing with min-max character builds. First question, what is the most fun build you can think of for a level 6 5-shot? This is a difficult question because it is so personal. What you find fun and what I find fun could be completely different. For me, I love to play support and controller characters. For me, I like to help my allies and stack the deck on the battlefield to make sure that all the enemies are locked down. They really can't do anything. After so many years, dealing a bunch of damage really just is not appealing to me anymore. It can be a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, and definitely I played those overpowered blaster character builds, paladins, that were multi-class with warlocks and sorcerers, but right now I like support characters. If I had to recommend a really fun overall build, there are two that I would recommend. The first is my updated dragon build, which basically allows you to play a dragon in D&D 5th edition, and you can see an entire video on that. The build can do a little bit of everything, and you can make adjustments to it to fit your specific purposes. But by level 6, that build is fully online, and you should have great fun breathing fire in your new draconic form. Now, my second option, if you want to go for more of a martial character, that is a Cavalier Fighter 3 and an Ancestral Guardian 3 Barbarian. This multi-class creates such a disgusting tank. It negates so much damage towards your allies while also outputting a competitive amount of damage itself. The main thing with this build is just finding a way to get a reaction, and that can either come from your fighting style or by taking a feat with something like a variant human. But if you do so, you'll be using your entire action economy, action, bonus action, reaction every single round. This build is a force multiplier and is fantastic in boss fights. So those two are the builds I would recommend. And then your second question really has thrown me off. Give me your honest, best, min-maxed 4 elements monk build. I'm serious. Why? Why are you serious? Because this is, in my opinion, the worst subclass in all of D&D 5th edition, by a mile. You get 1, maybe 2 uses of your subclass features, and even then the overall features of this subclass really just suck. If you have the right DM, you can have a fun time playing a 4 elements monk. Maybe, I've always had to heavily homebrew the 4 elements monk to even make it playable. Despite my best efforts to run this subclass without any homebrew involved with it, it just doesn't really function. So what you want from me is to take a non-functioning subclass and min-max it. Now, min-maxing usually necessitates having an ability or an idea that you want to take to its extreme. You want to take one particular aspect of your character, whether it be damage, healing, support, combat manipulation, whatever, and push it beyond the bounds of regular game balancing expectations. So first, we actually have to identify something about the 4 elements monk that is good that we actually want. Let me tell you, that was tough. I actually spent like an hour thinking about this particular question before I sat down and started recording. Yet I actually found an elemental discipline that we can actually min-max around. It is called the Fangs of the Fire Snake, and by spending 1 key point, you can extend your unarmed strike distance by 10 feet. This extension lasts until the end of the turn, and it makes your unarmed strikes do fire damage. You can spend a whole extra D point to do a whopping 1d10 extra fire damage, which we're never going to do on this build. But we have our basis, extending the range of our unarmed strikes. That way we can hit our enemies and get away with our increased movement speed long before they can ever get to us. So this is the build, and it's going to come online about 4th level. Your starting race is going to be the Bugbear. This is due to its long-limbed feature, meaning that our unarmed strikes naturally have an extra 5 feet of reach. We're going to start off with 2 levels in Monk. This will get us key points in our improved martial arts die. Already we're able to strike from 10 feet away and run away, meaning that enemies can't hit us with an attack of opportunity as we're leaving. For 3rd level, we're going to multi-class into an Undead Warlock. This gets us access to our Form of Dread. We have to buff up our unarmed strikes somehow, and our Form of Dread is going to do that. For the price of a simple bonus action, we're going to get some much needed temporary hit points because a monk does not have a big enough hit die. But also, we're getting an ability where once per turn, when we hit a creature with an attack, they can make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, our target is frightened of us until the end of our next turn. Meaning that if they're failing that save, we can act as kind of like a pseudo tank. We're preventing that enemy from moving closer to our allies, and giving them disadvantage on attacks. Ideally, if they are a melee-focused enemy, we've just completely locked them down. Now, for Warlock, these are the spells we're going to take. We're going to take Booming Blade, and we can use that to run up, hit an enemy, and do some extra thunder damage on the back end when they have to move to try and follow us. Next up, we're also going to take the cantrip Lightning Lure. This is to get particular enemies out of melee range with our friends, particularly if they are frightened of us. For 1st level spells, we're going to pick up things like Hex, Hellish Rebuke, and Expeditious Retreat. Hex for more damage, and it's going to pair well with another class that we're going to take later. Hellish Rebuke just to get us a reaction in case we are hit, and Expeditious Retreat just to give us more speed if we really need to zoom across the battlefield. Then at 4th level, we're finally going to multi-class into a 4 elements monk, and of course we're going to take Fangs of the Fire Snake. This sets up our maximum reach build. For the next level, you have an option between fighter or monk. If you're going with a fighter, you're going to be taking the unarmed fighting style. That way you're hitting with D8s instead of D4s. Or you could take another monk level, get another key point, and instead of taking an ability score improvement, you're going to pick up the mobile feat. This will increase your movement speed and make it so an enemy that you hit will not be able to take an attack of opportunity against you. The mobile feat will allow you to coast around the battlefield and attack the squishiest target the enemy has. But yeah, you're going to take one or the other, and whichever class you don't pick up, you're going to take that other one for your next level up. So by 6th level, you're going to have 4 levels of Monk, 1 level of Undead Warlock, and 1 level of Fighter. From there, you can take 12 levels of Elements Monk, or 2 levels of Fighter in pretty much any order that you want. Leveling Monk is just to get extra attack and some more key points, while you're leveling Fighter to get things like Action Surge and a Fighter subclass. And for the Fighter subclass, my 2 suggestions are Battlemaster Fighter or Cavalier Fighter. Battlemaster is going to give you some more range with a lunging attack and some more utility. Cavalier is great for an additional proficiency, and its particular feature does not require bonus action, as you will have a lot put on your bonus action each and every round of combat, so something like an Echo Knight or Samurai really doesn't work with this build. There are just not a lot of great places to use that bonus action. So if I was going to min-max a Way of the 4 Elements Monk, this is how I would do it, but I would also just recommend not playing it, because it's just terrible and it was a mistake. And then your third question is another min-max challenge. How would you make the best cheating gambler character, especially out of but also in combat? I mean, this seems pretty easy. You're going to go Arcane Trickster 3, and then you're going to pick up 2 levels of Divination Wizard. You're going to put Expertise into Sleight of Hand, and using your Invisible Mage hand, you're just going to cheat. If you roll low or one of your opponents rolls high, you're just going to use your Wizard Portent die to replace the roll. Later on, when you hit 4 levels of Rogue, you're going to take the feat Lucky, and you're probably just going to continue with Arcane Trickster from there, as eventually you're going to take Reliable Talent and basically be able to cheat at anything. So it's not a particularly complicated build, but it is incredibly luck-based. Really, your main choice is to go either Variant Human or Halfling. You choose Halfling if you never want to roll a 1, or you choose Variant Human to get the lucky feat right off the bat. Maybe there's something better I could do, but I think I used my last brain cells trying to min-max that 4 Elements Monk. So I hope those are what you were looking for, and good luck on your level 6 5-shot. Next question, which comes from my Plot Webs video. The Cult of Orcus needs to gather 3 artifacts. Was this number chosen independent or in relation to the number of players? I already answered this question for this particular commenter, but I want to put it out here. 3 artifacts was chosen independent of the number of players. 3 is a really good number in storytelling. We can see the number 3 pop up from ancient myths. 3 allows us to establish a pattern and then break it. The first artifact establishes the rules of how this campaign's kind of gonna go. The second artifact reinforces a pattern in the story, and the third artifact allows us to throw in a twist or something different to occur. There is something primal to having 3 things in a story, or 7 really. So the advice is, if you don't know how many of something to have in a story, 3 is probably the right answer. I really like to give this advice out for newer DMs because I've seen so many come forward and they're like, in my campaign, you're gonna have to go through these 12 dungeons, or you're gonna have to find these 8 artifact fragments. And all I can do is sit there and realize, yep, this is their canon event. Because I feel like every dungeon master makes this mistake at some point. We add too many MacGuffins into our campaigns, and after a certain point, it becomes just a grindy mess. I'm telling you all, less is more. Go really deep into 3 dungeons and the lore that surrounds them, the design within. Don't try to make 12 subpar dungeons, because by the time you reach dungeon 9, your players are going to be so done. Keep the numbers in your campaign small, and if you don't know how many of something to add, 3 is usually the number. Are you going to make a video on the homebrewed version of the champion? Because the concept sounded cool. Yeah, I'm re-answering this question here, but the Vanquisher video is scheduled and it is coming up. Art is actually getting done for the PDF right now, so when the art is done, the PDF is ready, and the video is edited, yeah, it will be up on the channel. I honestly cannot wait for some of you to play this subclass. It's not the most powerful by any means, but it's what I've used to take dozens of players from being a beginner D&D player to really advancing and understanding all the finer mechanics. Ideally, it should feel like the subclass is growing in complexity the further you progress down its advancement, until by the end of the subclass, a player is able to think tactically in combats about how to best use their abilities. Through this slow progression of complexity, they begin to learn the finer details of D&D combat. While not having to be explained everything, they can intuitively grasp why advantage is good, how they should position themselves on a battlefield, why using action surge is important, and ideally how they should be taking more short rests as a fighter. But on top of all this, the subclass provides a strong utility foundation for the subclass. The subclass gives the player tools to have out-of-combat utility. Again, I can't wait to hear what you guys think of the Vanquisher. I will say this here though, I'm probably not going to be changing it for any reason. This has been a tried and true test design that I've used for, I think, the past 5 or 6 years. It's been refined a lot along the way, but I'm pretty comfortable with where it is right now. Its goal is not to be the best fighter subclass, but to just bring in new players into the hobby. Final 2 questions for this video. Do you consider playing TTRPGs to be a form of therapy? No, I think TTRPGs can be therapeutic, but players that treat the game like therapy can have a really unhealthy connection to the campaign world and to other characters. I think TTRPGs can act as escapist fantasy, but I don't think you should be sitting down at a table expecting therapy. Because at the end of the day, it's a game designed for you to have fun, and while it might be therapeutic for you, if you're trying to use TTRPGs as therapy, then you're putting that burden of therapy on your dungeon master and to a degree the other players. That is not fair to them. You can have a strong connection to the game and be looking forward to it every single week. But if you're intending a TTRPG to heal a disorder or grant you relief from the troubles of your life, there might be bigger problems there. Although take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm not a mental health professional. Maybe there's a therapist out there that would say, oh yeah, D&D and other TTRPGs are definitely a form of therapy. I don't particularly see it that way, but hey, I could be wrong. Final question for today though, also, what are your favorite fantasy/D&D tropes to play out in-game? I'm gonna choose 3 because I have a lot of them. First of all is the destiny/fate trope. I graduated college as a philosophy major, so these type of questions really interest me. Especially in a world with active gods, what does fate mean? Is a prophecy set in stone? Or can prophecies be changed? Can fate or destiny be changed? Playing out these types of tropes with the right players can get for some really interesting discussions within D&D sessions. Honestly, as a DM and a player, I live for an hour-long discussion on the world, what we should do, or just some aspect of the campaign world, where the players are fully in character wrestling with these difficult ideas. I find that so cool. And my second favorite trope really plays off of this, which is the villain with a point. Don't get me wrong, I love me some pure evil villains. I don't think every villain should be redeemable or have this moral core, because sometimes it's just fun to fight evil and kill it. At the same time though, when the villain actually starts speaking and telling the players their ideology, and when the players start to realize, oh, they're actually right about some of their criticisms, that also leads to some great moments. Because then the players have to reconcile with fighting this villain, but also trying to keep in place some of the same systems that the villain is trying to destroy. Now the villain is going about their actions in a very evil and extreme way, but it gives a bit more depth to the entire campaign. Or it can lead to these dynamic campaign endings that don't resolve with a final boss fight. I've had campaigns end where the players befriend the villain. They basically send the villain off to prison to do time for their past crimes, or somehow redeem them or give them a pardon, and in exchange they work together to fix the systems that the villain was trying to destroy, but in a better way. Those are some of the most uplifting campaigns that I've ever run. I think the final trope I'll talk about though is the Paragon of Good. This is a particular NPC or group that always tries to do the right thing. They embody many virtues like kindness, truthfulness, and patience. As a DM and player, I always like encountering a paragon of good in a TTRPG because it's like chicken soup for the soul. You know that this character or this group is safe. Also provides an avenue where if something happens to that paragon of good, the party is going to respond. Because for most players, if they see a genuinely good person or group of people under threat, they are wanting to go and help them. Especially if that paragon of good has helped them in the past. And if you made it this far in the video, consider subscribing if you haven't already. It tremendously helps a smaller channel like mine and helps me grow and be seen by more people on YouTube. And if you haven't seen the previous video of GM911, check out that video right here. And thank you for entering the dungeon.